When I was a kid, I wanted to be like John Lennon. I felt a kinship with him. Lennon lost his mom in a car accident when he was a kid. I lost my mom in a car accident when I was 6 years old. Lennon played guitar. I played guitar. Lennon wrote songs. I wrote songs. Lennon became a giant rock star. Please subscribe. After my car accident, I really couldn't ride in a car without having a panic attack for a little while. I was constantly irritated and terrified and like traumatized all the time. I basically just stayed in my room all day, every day, too scared to go back out into the world. My family did their best. They helped me through those early stages of PTSD, which is what I was going through. But the Beatles were the thing that actually made me want to rejoin the world again. My dad gave me a copy of A Hard Day's Night when I was about 8 years old or so, and I absolutely loved it. I loved the music. I loved the comedy. It was an emotional release. It was inspiring. And I especially loved John Lennon in it. He was like this ideal human being to me. Funny.
Give us a kiss.
Talented, self-contained, impervious to the world around him. Always had a quip, always had a comeback.
I now declare this bridge open.
He was like a real-life Bugs Bunny, who is another hero of mine, by the way. But he could also play guitar.
Rinky, pinky, pinky, what do they do when there is no starry sky?
And his music was like instinctually appealing to me. It was understanding. It was vulnerable, but it was brave too. But it was also fun. He wrote these incredibly fun, anthemic, foot-stomping, head-bopping classics. And he also wrote these like gorgeous tapestries of meaning and hope and pain.
If I fell in love with you, would you promise to be
He was an
true?
absolutely complete artist in my mind. And I learned that both he and Paul McCartney had lost their moms when they were kids too. John's mom died in the traffic accident, and Paul lost his mom to cancer when he was 14 years old. And they bonded over that shared grief, that shared understanding of what it's like to lose your mom as a kid. And it helped them be more collaborative songwriters, helped them be more closer friends. Because when you lose your mom, you don't just feel sad about it, you feel weird about it too. Because everybody's got a mom. It's weird not to have a mom, especially to kids. So John and Paul literally helped each other feel more human and less like weird other things that didn't have moms. And they helped me feel less weird too. I felt lost. I felt like a motherless little tragedy walking around bumming everybody out, you know. Everybody with this sad look on their face when they'd hear about the accident. And, like this kind of malaise would fill the room. And I hated that. I didn't want to be pitied. I didn't want people to look at me with all this like pain in their eyes. And then here were John Lennon and Paul McCartney. And they both went through what I went through. And nobody looked at them with pity. They loved life. They loved girls and music.
I was named of innocence. I don't want to go.
Sorry for disturbing you, girls.
I bet you can't guess what I was in for.
And smoking and wearing bracelets and doing sarcasms and...
The place is surging with girls.
Please, sir, can I have one to surgery, sir, please, sir?
No, you can't.
And they could sing. Their harmonies were so silken and tight, and their style and confidence, and they were funny. They were actually really funny in that movie. Not like other musicians in other movies. The Beatles were actually pretty good actors at playing themselves. Not in every movie they did, but especially in A Hard Day's Night. If you haven't seen that movie, please check it out. But I realized if you can make somebody laugh, they don't pity you anymore. If you can make somebody sing or dance or enjoy something you're doing on stage, they don't feel sorry for you anymore. They lose that look of pity and they gain this look of like awe, of appreciation, of love. People loved the Beatles. People love the Beatles still. So I wanted to be like them. I wanted to sing like them. I wanted to play guitar. I wanted the thousands of people to chase me through the train station. I looked up at John Lennon on stage singing, get everybody to freak out and sing his songs back at him. And I thought, that looks like a good job.
That's a good job.
So I wore Beatles merch. I watched the Beatles movies. I watched the Beatles documentaries. I wore little peace signs around my neck. I had the circular glasses like Lennon did. And basically from the ages of like 9 to 13 years old, I formed my identity around my love and idolization of John Lennon. The Beatles kind of helped me regain my childhood, regain my love of the world, regain my love of life. And then one day I was heading into what would have been junior high. I was 13 years old. We took the train and we would ride to school with this small group of like adult friends we had. It was public transit. So they were going to work. Me and my friends were going to school. And I was bragging, as I remember it, about how much I loved John Lennon, how I could play his songs on guitar, how I thought he was the best songwriter of all time. And I was probably being pretty annoying. And then one of the adult people that was with us, this guy who's probably in his 40s, he looked at me, he said, "Oh, John Lennon's an asshole." And I was like, "What? What did you say?" I didn't understand the sentence. He abandoned his wife. He abandoned his son. He beat them. He was emotionally abusive to them. He was a voracious womanizer and drug addict. Anyway, he listed all these things about Lennon, these like horrible allegations. I'd never heard anything negative about John Lennon in my entire life. I must have looked shocked because one of the ladies next to him like elbowed him in the ribs. I was like, "Stop it." But it was too late. This round-faced, beady-eyed, blue snow jacket wearing dickhead on the train had just like disrupted my entire little world, my entire little coping mechanism. And as much as I wanted him to be wrong, as much as I thought he was just being an asshole himself, there was something about the way he said it. It's like he seemed so confident in it. And eventually, when I, worked up the courage and looked into it, I learned that John Lennon, this man of peace and wisdom and hope, this idol that I had also tragically been a man of violence and stupidity on multiple occasions in his life. I was heartbroken. I thought he was perfect. I thought he was flawless. It was like being lied to by somebody you thought could only tell the truth. It was like learning a horrible secret about someone you love. It literally changes the way their face looks to you. And it changed the way John Lennon's face looked to me. It changed the way I heard his music. It shattered the glass around his name. It revealed his humanity to me. And it caused me to lose a lot of my faith in him as a musician, but also really as a religious figure, which is more or less how I saw him. But now finding out that he could also be cruel and mean and violent and different from the affable, funny version of him I'd seen in the movies, I felt tricked. The songs about love and understanding and the principled stands on peace and togetherness, all that started to seem like a ruse or like a gimmick. It made me feel sick to my stomach. I stopped listening to the Beatles and Lennon altogether. So I stopped wearing the peace signs. I took down the posters. And I started looking for new heroes. I found artists like Prince, like Frank Zappa, Bob Dylan, Lou Reed, people I knew weren't assholes. It took me years of being let down by other artists and other heroes and just people in general, and for me to let myself down a bunch of times to learn the hard, liberating truth that we're all assholes. Now, I've discussed this in more detail in my asshole chart video. I'm not going to go over it again here, but check it out, link in the description. But now, all these years later, I think back on that guy on that train, and I still wonder, is that true? Are the allegations against him true? Are they fair? Are they just? Is it possible people are simply trying to take down an icon? Are people simply attacking John Lennon because he represents power and fame and a sort of like peak mid-20th century cultural relevance? Is it because he's a boomer? Today we're going to find out those things. We're going to look at the darker side of John Lennon and see if he crosses the irredeemable line. For those not familiar with my graph here, if you cross this line, the irredeemable line on either side of the central purity line, then you are an asshole. You are one. That's it. You're still whatever else you were before, a writer, a painter, a musician, but it's like a mark on your driver's license. Whatever else you do in life, whatever else you make or become, you are also now an asshole. But anything we do that goes below this line, then you're simply being an asshole temporarily. And it's not a permanent categorical thing. Now, I know that there are some people out there who are already offended that I would even consider calling John Lennon an asshole because what Lennon made was so beautiful and impactful and powerful. And John Lennon's murder was so callous and brutal, and the end of his life so sudden. People frankly haven't gotten over it yet. I sympathize with those people. I really do. I kind of used to be one of you. Some people can't hear a song without thinking about his death. And that is a tragedy. Lennon's murder took away people's ability to hear his music in an open and present way. And it took away Lennon's right to become an elderly, soul-searching boomer who got to apologize to all his previous mistakes and, have people forgive him. It took away Lennon's right to atone. It took away our right to see him as anything but a martyr or a saint. Well, today I'm giving that right back to John Lennon. Today, John Lennon is just another human being. We're going to take 3 major accusations of assholery against him, and we're going to put them up on the asshole chart and see how it all bears out. So if you're a Lennon fan like I am, do you dare ask the question, was John Lennon an asshole? Accusation number 1. John Lennon cheated on both of his wives. There is no party or person or non-person or any entity of any kind out there who disputes the idea that John Lennon cheated on both of his wives numerous times. John Lennon was apparently routinely unfaithful to both Cynthia Lennon and Yoko Ono. Lennon was also famously uncareful about his affairs. He flaunted them in Cynthia's face for years in the 60s. Women loved Lennon. They would do anything to sleep with him, but also apparently didn't have to do that much. With Yoko, it gets a little bit more complicated. John and her didn't have the same rules about monogamy and infidelity that most the rest of us have in our relationships. The famous 18-month lost weekend, for example, that took place in the early 70s, where Lennon and May Pang basically got high and drunk and gallivanted around Los Angeles, was actually orchestrated by Yoko Ono. She was exhausted. She was apparently tired of living with Lennon, who was battling multiple forms of addiction at the time, and she needed a break, and she knew that Lennon liked Pang, and so she proposed the idea to Lennon, who accepted. Now, as crazy as it seems, this plan actually worked, and John and Yoko became much, much closer as a result when Lennon returned from California. But that does not mean that Lennon couldn't be crude and awful to Yoko Ono too. Remember, in the 1970s, John and Yoko were battling the Nixon administration and the U.S. immigration authorities, who were all trying to deport John from the country. Lennon lost his mind on election night in 1972 when he saw that Nixon had won a second term. He was at a party at Jerry Rubin's house, the famous left-wing activist. He was hanging out with him and Abby Hoffman and Yoko Ono and a whole bunch of other kind of like who's who from that era of like lefty celebrity politics. When the Lennons arrived, the party was soaked in despair. Lennon was drunk, artistically blocked, jealous of his wife's creativity, harassed by the U.S. immigration authorities. Now he saw the radicals on whom he'd staked his reputation and whom he blamed for his persecution by the government, weeping for their own lost dreams. He ripped into Rubin and Hoffman, calling them middle-class Jews and pigs. When theater director Judith Malina tried to calm him, he screamed at her, "I want to cut you with a knife." Others remember him threatening to go outside and shoot a cop. The only person who could quell his anger was Carol Riolini, Rubin's roommate. In full view of Ono, Lennon and Riolini began to talk and then kiss before he led her into the next room. She told him that she couldn't make love while his wife was outside the door. "We're getting divorced," he told her. Soon Ono and the remaining guests were forced to listen to cries and groans of sexual pleasure. Then Lennon reemerged, gestured silently at Ono, and headed for the door. This was an extreme but not isolated incident of marital discord. This was allegedly the incident that caused Yoko to send Lennon on his lost weekend. And by all accounts, when Lennon returned to Yoko in New York and they had Sean, Lennon became a loving and devoted father and a much better husband. Now, there are so many books and rumors and myths about the Lennons who were living inside the Dakota around this time that it is truly hard to parse what is fact and what is fiction. There's so many hangers-on and like former associates and people who are rumored to have worked there at the time that the Lennons were there who've levied accusations about like drug use and adultery on both parties. I think it ends up being very, very murky and kind of a different thing than Lennon's infidelity with regard to Cynthia. Lennon was a much bigger asshole to Cynthia in general than he ever was to Yoko, though he could definitely be an asshole to both. The question is, does Lennon's routine adultery achieve him an irredeemable status on the asshole chart? Now, adultery in general is a giant asshole move. It is at least a top tier, special kind of asshole move if you do it. People will remember it. Yes, John Lennon was a horrendous husband. He was an unfaithful and untrustworthy and a terrible partner. And he was willing to humiliate both of his wives publicly. I think it ranks just under irredeemable on the selfish side of the line and just about as equally on the careless side. So it's going to be an almost perfect third tier asshole move on both sides. Lennon was certainly capable of being an asshole when it came to cheating on his wives, but the only reason we know about it is because he was famous. If this were someone in your real life, just another human being, I think a lot of this would fall under the none of my business category because it involved John Lennon and his wives. Their personal lives. It doesn't forgive what he did, but I am not involved in his personal life, so I cannot really say I was wronged by it, and I cannot confer an irredeemable asshole score upon him for it. Accusation number 2, John Lennon abandoned his son Julian.
Dad separated from Mum when I was like 3 or 4, maybe 5. So,
I didn't know that.
So he went off in another direction. I didn't see him much at all. And, you know, the only...
3 or 4 years old?
Yeah.
Oh,
I maybe saw him 4, maybe 8 times at the most before his death. And so...
How old were you then?
17.
So in 14 years you had 8 meetings with your dad?
Maybe a few more here and there, but it was few and far between.
Was it fatherly or?
It was difficult.
Yeah.
It was very difficult. And also seeing as he'd started a new life with Yoko and having another baby, Sean, the whole attention was directed over there. So when Mum separated, you know, all she asked for was clothes for my back, food for my stomach, and enough money to put me through school. So we grew up basically not poor, but we weren't poor, but we weren't rich.
Not like you
either.
think John Lennon's son will grow up.
Oh, no.
In 1970, John Lennon and Yoko Ono drafted a new will and testament that completely excluded Julian Lennon, John's son, from his first marriage. It would seem that John simply wanted very little to do with Julian from about the year 1967 onward. John provided Cynthia and Julian with a small home and a little bit of money, but nothing compared to what he spent on himself and his new wife, Yoko. In a now famous open letter, telegram, that Lennon sent to Cynthia in 1976, Lennon protests that he wants to see Julian more, but that Cynthia just won't let him, and that she secretly wants to get back together with him, and all this other, frankly, pretty petty stuff. After John died, Julian had to sue Yoko Ono and the Lennon estate in order to get even a penny of Lennon's trust. Now, people can debate as to how much they think Julian deserves from John Lennon's trust. That's not important to me. What's clear, though, is that John just didn't want Julian to have anything. It took him 16 years in court, but finally, in 1996, Julian was awarded 20 of the over $200 million John left behind. Now, he could have gone further and tried to have the whole will declared invalid and could have possibly collected much, much more money. But he apparently was satisfied with the 20 million.
There was a great deal of anger there, but there's also, you know, I've grown up a lot, and there's been forgiveness since then. But it was tough, yeah.
He seems to kind of be over the whole issue now. I think that's pretty big of Julian. I mean, $20 million does make the medicine go down a little easier. And if you think about that from Julian's perspective, his father was beloved around the world and completely ignored Julian, acted as if he wasn't there.
It's been, I think, a lot harder than easier than people might think. You know, when people don't take you personally seriously as an artist, but just only want to know you because of your father.
Blame you because of your name.
Well,
yeah.
They want to know you because of your father, and that's it. And that's a tough one to ride. I mean, I was thinking about, you know, the fact that every time I went to a new school, you know, I was introduced by the headmaster of the school at the first day of assembly that here's John Lennon's kid. And so to even begin to try and make real friends at that stage was a tough thing to do.
Forgiveness from Julian says a lot. It says a lot to me. Not only about Julian, but also about the little bit of a relationship that he and John did have. Now, many people may defend John Lennon here. They will say, well, he was from a different time and a different generation. He was abandoned by his own father. Lennon, therefore, I guess, didn't know any better but to abandon his own child. You know, I know it is true that hurt people hurt people. We all know that now. But it is also true that not all hurt people all the time. It's a little less pithy, but it's also true. John Lennon understood very specifically how his own father abandoning him affected his own life. He wrote songs about it. And of all people, he should have known how devastating losing a parent is to a child. The tragedy of John Lennon's murder wasn't just that he was taken from the world so young and we couldn't hear his music anymore, is that he wasn't given time to apologize and reconcile with his son Julian. So again, while this is third-tier asshole territory, it doesn't pass the irredeemable line since Lennon has literally been forgiven by the very person he wronged. Doesn't get him off the hook for doing it, but it means that he literally wasn't irredeemably an asshole when he did it. Accusation number 3. John Lennon hit his wife Cynthia, general violence towards the innocent. In her 2006 book, John, Cynthia Powell, formerly Cynthia Lennon, wrote, "Before I could speak, he raised his arm and hit me across the face, knocking my head into the pipes that ran down the wall behind me. Without a word, he walked away, leaving me dazed, shaky, and with a very sore head. I was shocked, really shocked, that John had been physically violent. I could put up with his outburst, the jealousy and possessiveness, but violence was a step too far." Cynthia broke up with John only to take him back 3 months later.
But I mean, he didn't beat me up. I mean, he just smacked me across the face and I hit my head against the pipe in college. And at that point I thought, well, I've never experienced this in my life and I don't want to see it again. And I didn't.
But you forgave him?
Well, it took 3 months. I left him at that point and said, on your bike.
Did he ever have any remorse openly towards you? Did he ever say he was sorry? Did you ever discuss it again?
Oh, yes. I mean, he was desperately sorry. He didn't. It was an instant. It was something that he couldn't help himself, and he didn't do it again. And I wouldn't have been with him if he had. In fact, that was the first and last time that he ever lifted a finger or a hand to me.
So here, Cynthia Powell is doing what many victims of domestic abuse do, and that is defending their abuser. That said, I actually do believe her that this was the only time John got violent with her after that point. We know that John could be a violent person. In his 1980 interview, he actually described the violence he'd gotten into more in his youth, both against men and women.
All that, I used to be cruel to my woman and beat her. That's me, because I used to be cruel to my woman and physically. Any woman. You know, I was a hitter. I couldn't express myself, and I fought men, I hit women, I was violent. That's why I'm always on about peace. You see, it's the most violent people that go for love and peace. And I sincerely believe in love and peace. But I am absolutely a violent man who has learned not to be violent and regrets his violence.
Some people have even suggested that Lennon was exaggerating here, that the 70s were much more of like a chauvinistic, kind of macho time, and that Lennon wanted to add to his own legend by acting as if his past was more kind of violent and reckless than it actually was. That said, we do know that Lennon could be very violent. Accusation 3.5. John Lennon beat up a man for calling him gay. In 1963, at Paul McCartney's 21st birthday bash at Paul's Aunt Gin's house. It is famously the party where Paul and Jane Asher were first seen together, and it was also reportedly a party where John Lennon became very, very drunk. John Lennon beat up radio DJ Bob Wooler for suggesting that he and Brian Epstein, the Beatles manager, had had an affair. Then, Cavern Club DJ Bob Wooler, glass in hand, edged over to John and made a crack about the guitarist's recent trip to Spain with Brian. "Oh, it wasn't a joke," the lawyer, Rex Macon, says with a chuckle. "It was an overture. Bob was gay. It was definitely an overture. Maybe Wooler was drunk. He certainly didn't realize how drunk John was, or how violent he could be when he'd been drinking. John punched Wooler in the eye, hard enough to knock him down, then set to kicking him, cracking his ribs with the sharp toes of his Beatle boots. The tall, solidly built Bill J. Kramer swooped in to pull the white-faced, screaming John off the prone and gasping disc jockey. Then Brian Epstein joined in to help scrape Wooler off the ground and take him to the hospital."
And he was saying, "Well, come on, John, tell me," something like that. He was saying, "Tell me about you and Brian." We all know that. And obviously I must have been frightened of the in me to get so angry at that. When you're 21, you want to be a man and all that. And it was the first time I thought, I can kill this guy. I just saw it like from on a screen, that if I hit him once more, that's going to be it. And that's when I gave up violence, because all my life had been like that. And that's when I really got shocked.
Now, while Lennon did not almost kill Wooler, as he said in his interview, he did beat him up so badly that he needed to be brought to the hospital. Wooler was seen walking around a few minutes after the fight by multiple witnesses. So Lennon's domestic abuse defenders will point to this fact and say that Lennon was also exaggerating when he said he hit women and fought men. He just wanted to seem cool and chauvinistic. Now, while I do think Lennon was probably exaggerating here a little bit, I don't think he would have simply made up the idea that he'd hit women before out of whole cloth. Lennon was known as a wild and violent guy, especially in his youth and especially when he got high and drunk. And he got high and drunk a lot. We know he hit Cynthia at least once. We know he beat up Wooler. We know he got in fights a lot in Hamburg and Liverpool when he was younger. I think we can sadly take him at his word when he says he hit more than just one woman one time. Now, I am considering the Bob Wooler and Cynthia slap here in the same category because they both involve Lennon being violent to the innocent people in his closest, most inner circle. In general, if you reach top-tier special kind of status 3 times, I think there's an argument that naturally launches you into irredeemable category. But repeated domestic abuse, as much as I hate to say it, it just crosses the line on its own for me. Yes, John did apologize. Yes, Cynthia accepted it. And yes, he apologized to Wooler, and Wooler accepted it. But at the end of the day, if you repeatedly are violent towards the people in your life, you get the asshole tag. I mean, if it were just another human being in your life and they were routinely beating up the people in their lives, you'd have to acknowledge their assholeness. It hurts me to say it. I don't want to call John Lennon an asshole, but I mean, you can't beat people up. Yes, you can reform. Yes, you can grow. Yes, you can become a better man. But part of that growth is inevitably going to be acknowledging that you are, in fact, an asshole. And that said, the irredeemability part of the irredeemable line isn't meant to mean that you aren't worth forgiving, that your music and your messages aren't worth loving. It's an acknowledgement that you, at some point in your life, crossed the line so far, everyone else around you should probably know about it. Lenny could be unstable. He could be violent. If he were just another human being in life, before you invited him over to a party, you'd tell your partner quietly, hey, this guy's an asshole. You'd still invite him to the party because he's funny, he's good with the guitar, But you'd inform the people who needed to know that an asshole was coming to dinner. John Lennon was arguably the greatest rock star who ever lived. Nobody ever did it quite like John Lennon did it. He was also inarguably one of the most influential musicians who's ever lived. Ignore the haters out there, by the way. This is not a video like that, obviously. Ignore the haters out there who say the Beatles were overly simplistic or bad musicians. They were self-taught musicians. They played at the standard of their day, and they were brilliant pop song writers, to the extent that they changed how people write music itself. John Lennon changed how people think about lyricism itself. He communicated deeply personal aspects of his personality, of his soul, to people all across the world, in all different types of cultures, and gave people hope and love and inspiration and beauty. John Lennon is one of the greatest things humanity has ever done. But he's also an asshole. As much as it does hurt me to say it, as much as I know the Lennon community out there will shun me, say I'm a traitor, the truth is, I think Lennon would admit he was an asshole too. Out in the world, we got the hero version of Lennon. We got the Jesus figure. We got the rock star. But the people closest to him, they got the asshole. I think Lennon would have owned up to that. I also think if fewer people like me would have idolized John Lennon, if fewer people would have seen him as some sort of prophet or demigod-like figure, I think he'd be alive today. As much as people tried to add mystery and intrigue to the intentions of the coward stalker that shot Lennon in 1980, in reality, he just wanted to be closer to his idol. He just wanted his name to be attached to Lennon's name forever, to be famous. Maybe if more people called Lennon an asshole when he was alive, if the label of asshole had been affixed to his name when he was here, then maybe it would have been a bit more boring. Maybe it would have been a little less inspiring or exciting as a figure, but maybe he would still be with us. Anyway, I don't know. But what I do know is that the music we love lives in our souls for our entire lives. Even when we become so sick and so weak that we can barely move or think or remember our own name, we can still remember the music we first fell in love with.
Did you like music when you were young?
Yes, I went to big dances and things.
What was your favorite music when you were young?
Well, I guess, Cab Calloway was my number one band guy I liked.
What's your favorite Cab Calloway song?
Oh, I'll be home there for Christmas. Oh, you can count and plan on me.
And Lennon is that music for me. His music is just in my soul. Lennon's work, to me, is not tainted by his asshole status. It is enhanced by it, because I don't idolize John Lennon anymore. Now I'm just a fan. Now I'm just somebody who appreciates the music.